Hello everybody and welcome back. Now in today's video we're talking about the second part of that first bullet point, causes of expansion, the impacts of Japanese militarism on foreign policy. Now just as a reminder, expansion means an extension of states' territory by encroaching on that of other nations pursued as a political strategy. This could also be economically overbearing them. This could be politically by sending people in to overthrow the government. It could be a military invasion, various things. That's what we're going to see with Japan, and specifically in this video, they're going to try multiple strategies. Now, militarism. Militarism is the belief or desire of a government or people that a country should maintain a strong military capability and should be prepared to use it aggressively to defend or promote national interests. That's the key thing here. When we are talking about militarism, we're not just talking about the love of one's military, the want to have a strong military. We're talking about the love and want of a strong military and for it to be used. For it to be used either as a political move of, well, we have this nuclear weapon, so listen to us or we're going to blow up your country, or to be, we're going to fight for democracy, so we're going to invade these three countries and bring them democracy. Right? So militarism isn't just appreciation of the military. It is using it as a tool politically, economically, socially, or militarily as an invasion. So in this video, we're going to be going over 4 examples. We're going to go over 4 really deep ones here. World War I, the Paris Peace Conference, the Washington Naval Conference, and the London Naval Conference. Now we're going to go over these 4 and we're going to divide them into 2 separate sections. World War I and the Paris Peace Conference, because those 2 immediately follow each other, and the Washington Naval Conference and the London Naval Conference, because those follow each other, and they tie together very closely. So, let's get in. Now, Japanese militarism on foreign policy. As we talked about in the previous video, the Meiji Restoration set the stage to build a massive military, to build this idea that we need to push for Japanese superiority. Thus, when World War I broke out in Europe, Britain reached out to Japan and said, hey, we know you have a strong navy, why don't you attack the German colonies in China? And Britain also told China, hey, why don't you attack the German colonies in your country to kind of get them back? And so Japan, this was their time to shine. They have proven themselves in Asia. They have proven themselves to be a strong nation. Now they need to prove themselves in the world, internationally. Thus, they went full force into World War I. And when they did, their biggest shining glory was the taking of the Shantung Peninsula, which is a key, kind of a large area in China that was usually dominated by Germany. When they took that area, when they were able to defeat the German colonists and gain dominating control over it, this is on China's mainland. This is on China's territory. So China reached out to Japan and said, hey, thank you for getting the Germans out of my country. Thank you for being such a strong military. We'll send our troops in so we can take back our land. At which point Japan said, no, you will not be doing that. Instead, here are the 21 demands that we ask of you. And so in the middle of a war, in the middle of World War I, where the rest of the world in Europe is descending in chaos, where South America is facing its first global battles, Japan is essentially taking the knife out from the Germans and pushing it towards the Chinese and saying, we are here and we're going to keep this territory. And so essentially, China, not being able to fight them off, not being able to fight them back, agrees, and they end up signing the 21 demands, thus giving Japan the ability to annex Korea, establish major areas in a piece of land called Manchuria, which that will be important in the next couple of videos, and to essentially have it as a zone for Japanese economic investment and political investment. So, in the middle of all of this, Japan is testing their militarism, testing their military power, both politically and physically, to see just how far they can push it. That then gives them the power, the arrogance at the end of the war at the Paris Peace Conference. At the end of the war, Japan and China were were invited to come and join Britain, France, the United States to sign the Treaty of Versailles, dooming Germany and the Treaty of Saint-Germain and the Treaty of Trianon, so on and so forth. And in this, Japan says, yay, we did this. We signed it. Now you, Europe, will treat us as an equal. And Europe was like, sure, maybe. And Japan said, no. You will treat us as equals. In fact, here's a racial clause we want you to pass that says you cannot discriminate against us. And if you do, well, look at everything I did for you in Germany. Look at what my military did for you. Again, using it as a political pawn. And of course, China was, although still very upset about Japan taking a large part of their country, also was like, no, you need to pass that clause because I need help, guys. And so, what does this equal out to? Well, essentially, the First World War and what they did to China proved that Japan's military was strong enough to take out a European country like Germany, strong enough to hold lands in a foreign nation, and then was politically strong enough to threaten China and then eventually threaten Britain, France, and the League of Nations to show and recognize themselves. So essentially, this pride, this superiority that Japan feels about their military and their militarism severely grows, and it becomes this like chip on the Japanese shoulder to say, you want to fight with us, you want to mess around and find out, we're here. And that's going to become really crucial. Because at the end of this, Britain, America, and Japan come together. They come together to sign an agreement because Japan, Britain, and the United States are all the colonial powers of Asia. They are the three most powerful nations who can dominate over Asian countries. Right, like in the Philippines, all over China, and Japan expanding in Korea and the Shantung Peninsula. So these three come together and they say, all right, we won the war, our navies were the most superior. Now that World War I is over, let's revisit how we will use our navy from this point. So they came together and talked about limiting their ships, destroying some ships that they no longer need anymore, and to stop the construction of ships for the next 10 years. These three things, Japan was not really all that happy about. They weren't really excited about because they were obviously getting attacked through this, because the United States and Britain are saying, okay, great, thanks for everything you did in World War I, but if you don't reduce your military, because we're going to reduce our military, then you're going to have some problems on your hands. And this finds a lot of issues in Japan, because now that there's no more global war, half of the country of Japan, mainly the Navy, is arguing, why should we restrict our military? Why should we restrict our power in case we get attacked? They're arguing that they need as many ships as possible for their defense. Whereas the government of Japan is saying, yeah, no, we can't afford to keep this massive navy. So, do you guys want to have food and eat, or do you want to try to eat metal from the ships? So they eventually signed the Washington Naval Conference, and this kind of doesn't really go over very well. And as I mentioned, that they stopped production of ships in 10 years. This is 1920. So, 10 years later, these three countries meet again in the London Naval Conference. When they meet here, Japan comes super aggressive because after the Washington Naval Conference, there was a lot of political issues in Japan that restructured who was in power in the government. And so when Japan comes to the London Naval Conference, they're a lot more aggressive. They're a lot more pro-Navy. And so they come in saying, we are going to increase our Navy. We're going to come in to boost things up. Like, we think that we got screwed over in the Washington Naval Conference, so we're going to boost it up here. And Britain and the United States are like, hey, this is 1930. The Great Depression just happened. No, like, we're not, no. We cannot sustain this. So we're going to not change our conference. We're going to agree to everything we already agreed to. And Japan, there's no way you can afford to keep this Navy up. And if you do, that means you're just going to prove to us that you want to be aggressive. You want to invade. And Japan and the United States and Britain kind of have this argument that goes back and forwards. But essentially, the government of Japan signs the treaty that essentially allows them to have a little bit more ships, a little bit more here and there, but nowhere near what they needed. And this causes a massive division in the country. So much so that the prime minister who signed the London Naval Conference, there's an assassination attempt on him. He ends up dying after the attack a few months later. And whoever was in agreement with the London Naval Conference in terms of the government was thrown out. And essentially, this split the nation and allowed the military, including the Navy and the Army, to then attack, not physically, politically attack their own government to bring them down, thus giving them more power, which is why the first expansion we're going to see with Japan is 1931, 1 year after the London Naval Conference, which is a direct impact of this division, of this aggressive nature that Japan wants to keep.